Today on Bay News, high seas, higher stakes. The sea level is rising, yet South Florida keeps building.
Also, we'll tell you why sea level rise poses a threat to your drinking water.
We'll visit the FIU Virtual Reality Lab to show you sea level rise in another dimension.
Bay News starts right now. Good evening, I'm Michelle Moreno.
And I'm Jahari Canty. Today on Bay News, we have a special newscast, High Seas, Higher Stakes, dedicated to the issue of sea level rise and how it's affecting South Florida. We'll show you how flooding is set to increase, what Key Biscayne is doing to protect their community, and how inland neighborhoods are at risk.
That's right. Today we start off with the effects on this issue that is affecting the Sunshine State and what is being done to prevent it from further damage. Miriam Tapia has more.
Thank you, Michelle. Florida is a state where the majority of the population is crowded along the coast, specifically in South Florida. With the numerous tropical storms that occur, this puts waterfront properties and businesses at risk for storm surges that causes high sea level rise. Here's what you need to know on how South Florida is tackling this issue. Sea level rise has been an issue affecting South Florida for some time, specifically Miami Beach and downtown Miami. Now in 2017, purchasing a waterfront property in these areas have become a difficulty for buyers. Properties in these sectors now have certain requirements when in development. Engineer Roberto Rodriguez explains the new way of building a property when dealing with sea level rise here in Florida.
The city can now require your building to be at maybe a higher elevation, maybe a couple, 3, 4, 5, 10 feet higher. That extra elevation will prevent the sea level rise from affecting the property. When you purchase a property, you're going to develop on a property, you are in a flood zone map, and that flood zone map will determine if you need to purchase flood insurance and how frequently your property will become flooded, statistically speaking.
Flood zone maps vary depending where you live in Miami. According to the Environment tab on the miamidade.gov website, Miami Beach's flood zone is A, AE, and AH. Zone A is when there is no base flood elevation in these areas, meaning there is no way to flood-proof these structures. Zone AE is when the flood depths are greater than 3 feet. And Zone AH is when the rate zone corresponds to areas of shallow flooding, which usually happens between 3 feet. If you look at the areas of Biscayne Boulevard to Brickell Bay Drive, the zones include AE and VE. Now, Zone VE corresponds to the coastal areas, like Brickell Bay Drive. This is due to the association of storm waves. Now, these flood zones in Miami Beach and Brickell all require the purchase of flood insurance when owning a property.
Prices are definitely going to start rising a lot more in flood insurance as we get into this issue. Now, definitely, like most scientists that are looking into this flooding problem they're looking in a century perspective, so that's a lot of time. I think it's going to slowly and gradually become much more of a problem, but I think as this issue becomes more relevant, which it's starting to become relevant, I think that definitely flooding insurance prices will definitely rise, which will affect the buyers.
Yes, purchasing flood insurance and properties in these areas have increased, but this doesn't seem to stop buyers and developers from purchasing down here. In fact, the Sunshine State is becoming more resilient on this issue. There is still a lot of work to be done to fight against sea level rise, but one thing is for sure. The South Florida house and business market isn't slowing down anytime soon. If you want to know more information on how local businesses are affected by high sea level rise in Miami, go to our website, baynews.tv. From the Newsplex, I'm Miriam Tapia. Back to you, Jahari.
Thank you, Miriam. Some studies show that by the end of the century, South Florida will look very different than how it does today, all due to sea level rise. But recent studies are showing that the sea is rising much faster than originally thought, and that may be leaving us in deep water. Some scientists originally thought that by the year 2100, South Florida was going to see only a couple inches of sea level rise. However, new research published in 2016 shows the sea is rising twice as fast. Some estimates say it may rise as high as 6 feet by the end of the century. With that much rise, coastal areas will see a lot more water than they're used to. According to meteorologist John Morales, sea level rise is something that gets faster as it occurs.
Sea level rise is increasing not in a linear way, it's increasing in an accelerating way, in an exponential way. So while it may have risen 4 inches in 20 years at Virginia Key, it's possible then the next 20 years, instead of rising 4 inches, it'll rise a half a foot.
Flooding can already be seen in areas like Miami Beach when it rains and during the king tides. But according to University of Miami professor Harold Wanless, there are factors that are unaccounted for that may push the sea level high enough to completely wash away some parts of South Florida.
We're going to lose our barrier islands by the middle part of the century. The 6.6 feet by the end of the century is 2 feet by 2048, 3 feet by 2065, and by 2065, the storm erosion will have taken care of the barrier islands. They won't be as we know them at all.
Experts generally agree that there is no way to prevent sea level rise, but individual actions like carpooling and cutting down carbon emissions can help. For more information on what you can do to help combat sea level rise, go to climatecentral.org.
If the sea level keeps rising, we may be left without a dry place to stand. But some officials say that before we worry about how to stay out of the water, we may be out of water to drink. According to a study done by Florida Atlantic University, sea level rise increases the chances of salt water intruding into the Biscayne Aquifer, which supplies water to most of Broward and all of Miami-Dade and Monroe counties. According to Brad Shanoff of FIU Sea Level Rise Solutions Center, when salt water gets into the aquifer, the water inside becomes unusable.
Because of the fact that we have a very shallow aquifer that contains our drinking water, when you have the sea level rise, it's pushing up into that aquifer. And in some cases, like in Hallandale, actually, it's resulted in pollution of their aquifer. And once you have salt water mixing in there, it's unusable for drinking water.
If the aquifer were to become polluted, officials say filtering the salt from the water would be too expensive and harmful to the environment. However, some say desalination may not be as hard as you may think.
It's expensive, but it's getting cheaper all the time, and especially at large scale, it can be done much less expensive.
Until a permanent solution can be found, various South Florida cities have turned to the Floridian Aquifer in northern Florida for drinking water. Desalinating salt water may still be an option for the future. South Florida currently has 38 desalination plants in operation, and one more is being constructed. For an animation demonstrating saltwater intrusion in South Florida, please go to our website. Next up, we'll speak with the mayor of Key Biscayne and a resident of Miami to hear their concerns regarding sea level rise.
Stay tuned to see how low-income communities are being affected while South Florida battles this issue. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. With environmental issues such as sea level rise affecting South Florida, today we have a special panel that will weigh in on the concerns many residents have and also discuss some solutions to combat sea level rise. Joining me today is Mayor of Key Biscayne, Myra Pena-Lindsay, and Concerned Miami resident, Luis Rodriguez. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I wanted to start off with the mayor. What are some of the effects that you are seeing in South Florida, in particular Key Biscayne, when it comes to sea level rise?
Some of the impacts that we've seen in South Florida is extreme flooding in low-lying areas. And in Key Biscayne, what we've noticed, and we've been very proactive about addressing, is the impact and the severity of the king tides and how the water level is higher. It stays, the tides are lingering for a longer time, and they are coming in through our sewer storm evacuation system. So we have been very proactive about addressing this and trying to stay ahead of the impacts.
What are the approaches that you're taking when it comes to infrastructure and combating the water that is flooding the streets of your city? What have you guys done to approach that?
Well, because we're a very small community, we have been very disciplined about doing incremental improvements on a yearly basis. So, for example, we have a stormwater evacuation master plan that is now in its 3rd generation, and we have been very active in addressing how stormwater is evacuated, how you get rid of the flooding of the waters, of the intrusion, through pump systems, through deep well injections, and backflow preventers to make sure that we can really evacuate the waters and they don't have impacts on our residents and on our roads.
The mayor is bringing up very good points, very good defensive points in order to be able to deal with the situation that I think the international community is starting to become very aware of its occurrence. The density of water is directly controlled by its temperature. And if temperature increases in the ocean water as through the greenhouse effect, because we are expelling more carbon into the atmosphere, more of the heat that the sun is giving out is being contained within our atmosphere. And so through this biogeosphere, what we're creating is a greenhouse effect, which is increasing the temperature of the ocean water and creating a geothermal expansion that is making the sea level rise.
Now, another very practical change that we implemented about 20 years ago is our building code. All our building is built at a much higher level, and in fact, about 75% of our commercial real estate, our multi-house dwellings are also about 80% built up, and all our new redevelopment, the single-family homes, are built up. So those are practical changes that we can do in all our communities, implement in our communities, that make us more resilient.
So it's clear that sea level rise is very real and it's affecting many areas of South Florida, including Miami, where you live, Louis. How have you experienced it in your personal life? How has the sea level rise affected you?
I think we have to also acknowledge the fact that it's not just affecting me or you or everybody here, it's affecting the entire world. There's widespread consensus along the scientific community that this is an issue that isn't even a long-term negative effect anymore. It's something that is actually happening today.
So is that your main concern, that people knowing that this is something we need to address now and not later?
I think that we really also need to focus on the day-to-day impacts of all the residents of Miami-Dade County. Again, there's a lot more flooding in low-level areas. People are impacted going to work, picking up their children from school, getting from point A to point B. Big impact is that infrastructure that connects us all, the roads, the sewer systems. We need to make sure that it is resilient. So it is something that all Miamians are aware of, that they see, that they feel, and we all need to collectively implement change and be disciplined about creating Miami-Dade County as a resilient city.
You know, that's the idea right now, that this is a long-term negative effect, that this is something that's going to affect us later down the road when there's actually empirical evidence, as the mayor rightly puts, that it's happening right now. And so education is definitely a part of this. We need to instruct people on how they can help and move along down the road.
So our new president, Donald Trump, has stated in the past that climate change, he believes, is a hoax. We can argue that it's not, because we experience climate change here with the sea level rise affecting us in our homes and in our cities. Why does South Florida need this new administration to help us? Why do we need them?
About 1/4 of his voters who, like him, to some extent, believe that climate change and thus sea level rise are a hoax. Ignorance is definitely prominent in our government right now, specifically with this issue. When you have a congressman in Washington, D.C. bring snow to the floor of Congress and present that as evidence that climate change is not real, that is a huge disconnect between policymakers and the scientific community.
Well, I'll tell you, I, for one, refuse to rely on a soundbite, and saying something that is absolutely ridiculous and counterintuitive to get ratings is something that I just will not accept. And while a representative came in with snow to show that they still have snow in their communities, I thought it was very, very impactful when a representative from the state of Florida came in with a bottle full of mosquitoes during the Zika scare and said, really, you're not concerned? These are from Florida. Let me release them in this room. And so to me, it is about education. It is about looking for scientific evidence and not relying on ratings and sound bites and fear. So we all need to become educated and educate people who may not be immediately affected today because they are landlocked, but who will be incredibly affected just by the quality of life and the severe impacts it has on a global level. So I think we need to get over that, we need to get beyond it, and we need to move forward and make good policy.
The mayor brings up a great point, and I'm sorry, but she brings up a fantastic point.
Thank you.
She said that at a global level, right? She mentions the global level. So it's not, again, it's not something that is going to affect us. It's something that is currently happening, and it's something that the government, both local and federal, have to deal with.
Thank you both very much for speaking with us today about this very important issue. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Nutrient pollution is a significant threat to America's waterways and coastlines. It's caused when too much nitrogen and phosphorus enter the environment because of human activities. Coupled with climate change and rising temperatures, algae in the water grows faster than ecosystems can handle. Some of these algal blooms are harmful because they produce toxins that can make people sick. And these blooms are becoming more prevalent. You can help prevent nutrient pollution by cutting down fertilizer and pesticide use and choosing phosphate-free detergents, soaps, and household cleaners.
Welcome back to Bay News. Low-income neighborhoods in Miami have also fallen victim to flooding, which has impacted their daily lives. Residents are now left wondering how the city will help them. Our reporter Maria Vera explains how these communities are being affected.
Sea level rise is doing more than just causing physical damage to properties. It is impacting the quality of life for residents, especially in those low-income areas.
For example, like Shorecrest, where I was this past October, and I was in knee-deep saltwater inundation. And I had residents in a community there tell me that they couldn't get to their, for example, their dialysis appointment, or that they were late because they couldn't get their car in and out of their apartment complex.
Moms Clean Air Force is a nonprofit organization that is providing a voice for these communities.
So the way that Moms Clean Air Force helps residents and parents and those that care about children's health in low-income communities is that really we try to engage them and empower them to become voices for not only one particular issue, but really to become more active citizens in terms of being a spokesperson for what they want to see in their community.
There is a misconception that waterfront properties are the only ones feeling the effects. Oftentimes, inland communities that are less resilient feel them just as much. These residents don't want to get left behind or forgotten by politicians in efforts to find solutions.
The impacts in some of these communities aren't being taken care of, and so it's incumbent upon the residents of those to make sure to call and say, hey, we've had water in front of our apartment complex for 3 hours in the morning and then 3 hours again at night. What are you doing to help?
Miami Commissioner Ken Russell is one of those politicians fighting for the vulnerable communities through the implementation of the Sea Level Rise Committee.
One of the things that I've shifted the focus within their board is looking at how sea level rise will affect the poorer community, the areas of need that aren't necessarily thought of in the traditional discussions of sea level rise. And so one of the main things I did was add a board member seat to the committee, which would be a social justice seat, basically.
Residential pumps, which would be one solution to flooding, are about $1 million each, so the city would need help from the state and federal level.
Right now, that sort of help isn't forthcoming necessarily if you attach it to words like sea level rise and climate change. So we're getting creative with the wording of what we ask. Stormwater master plan is a much more palatable thing to a bipartisan legislature. But that being said, we would still be waiting for those funds for something like a traditional pump. And even in the wealthier communities that are at the water's edge, feeling the effect right now, we're having trouble finding the funds and budget to install the pumps for them.
The efforts to adapt Miami to sea level rise continue to be a challenge for low-income communities. Residents fear that asking for these funds will only mean a tax increase. The longer it takes to find these funds, the longer it'll take to combat the issue. For Bay News, I'm Maria Vera.
On our website, we have an exclusive look at how schools are incorporating the topic of sea level rise in their education.
Students and faculty members of Florida International University are finding new ways to bring awareness to the ongoing issue of sea level rise in South Florida through the use of virtual reality. FIU is one of a few universities in the country to have a mobile virtual reality lab that allows students to conduct research using 360 cameras and special software to create immersive videos.
My goal for the students, and I think their goal, isn't to become just complete experts in this particular medium, but to say, look, I was able to become familiar and proficient in this new medium, so I'm ready for what comes next.
Students are pushing the boundaries of storytelling by immersing users directly into the problems of sea level rise, such as filming communities that experience heavy flooding in streets. With the use of this new technology, viewers can get a glimpse of what can become of South Florida.
It's a very personal problem for Florida. Sea level rise is very intimate to us because we live right on the shore.
I have more of an understanding on how to make it better. I'm sort of a lot more aware about what's going on in the world and how sea level rise is really affecting everyone in the surrounding area.
For more information on research Florida International University is collecting through their mobile virtual reality lab, visit eyesontherise.org/virtual eyes. That's all for Bay News. High seas, higher stakes. We hope we've helped you get a better understanding of the threats of sea level rise and how it is up to us to create awareness.
For more information, please visit our website and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Bay News High Seas. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.